Chapter 15 Home. The squirrel crouched at the bottom of the oak tree, its muscles twitching as if it might race back up into the leaves any second. Ranger sniffed the air. He smelled squirrel. He smelled the fresh grass and gasoline twang of Dad's lawnmower. He smelled Luke and Sadie and pizza and somewhere, still buried in the garden dirt, a bone from a long ago streak. The squirrel twitched again. Instead of running up the tree, it took off toward the picnic table, and before Ranger could even think, he was chasing it. Legs flying behind him, ears perked up, nose sniffing ahead of him. Squirrel! They raced 3 times around the picnic table, through Mom's flowers, across the garden, and then zip! The squirrel raced up the oak tree and vanished into the shaking leaves above. Poor Ranger. Another one got away. Want a treat, boy? Ranger turned and saw Luke open the kitchen door. He bent down and held out his hand with a half slice of bacon in his open palm. Ranger rushed up to him, panting, and gobbled it up. Bacon! Home bacon! Ranger followed Luke inside to the mudroom, still licking grease from his muzzle. What's that? Luke reached for the first aid kit that hung around Ranger's neck. Ranger stood still while Luke lifted the strap and studied the rusty tin box. Then he noticed a quilt square and slipped it from under Ranger's collar. Did you dig all this up in the garden? That's pretty cool. Let's show Mom. He started to walk off without thinking. Ranger barked. Luke turned his eyes wide. What? Ranger trotted up to Luke and carefully took the leather strap and quilt square in his teeth. He tugged until Luke let go. Okay, fine. You found the stuff. It's all yours. What you gonna do with it? Ranger carried it to his dog bed. Luke laughed. I guess that's a good place to keep your treasures. Good job. You're a good boy, Ranger. He scratched Ranger's ear. Ranger leaned in and wagged his tail. He'd waited so long to hear those words. When Luke left, Ranger settled into his dog bed. He was tired, but before he went to sleep, he nuzzled the first aid kit. It was quiet now. The humming had stopped. Ranger poked at the kit with his nose until it was tucked into the folds of his blanket. Then he curled up and gave the quilt square a good long sniff. Sam's scent still clung to the fabric. Ranger could smell Ma, too, her mix of wildflowers and worry, and Lizzie and Amelia and trail bacon and oxen, but mostly Sam. Somehow Ranger knew Sam was home now, too. Aw, what a nice ending. And that's it. The last part is called the author's note. So imagine there's a picture of Ranger tucking the stuff in his bed, the quilt square and the first aid kit. Imagine saying goodbye to your house, almost all of your friends and extended family, and most of all, your possessions. Well, most of your possessions, not most of all, but you have to say goodbye to all your things, too. Leave everything you have. I got tingly hair from today. Imagine leaving everything you know to begin a long, long journey to a new home in a place you've never seen. The decision to set out on the Oregon Trail must have been a difficult one to make, but thousands of families like the Abbotts made that choice in the mid-1800s. Sam and his family are fictional, but their story is inspired by the diaries and journals of many real people who wrote a little bit each night as they traveled west on the overland trails that led not only to Oregon Territory, but also to California and the Great Salt Lake. The trip usually took about 5 months. That's if everything went well. Bad weather, disease, and trouble with livestock could all slow down the pace of travel. A ton of my family came west in the pioneers. A lot of them stopped in Salt Lake. A few of them came down to California. So we had a lot of family who traveled, and we have all their histories. It's neat to read their stories and what they had to deal with. Like Sam's family, many people traveled in mixed groups, often with different destinations. In the earliest days of the trail, many families were heading to the Oregon Territory for farmland. Starting in 1846, they were joined by Mormons like Sarah's family, who were bound for the Great Salt Lake area to escape religious persecution. When gold was discovered in California in 1849, another group of travelers headed west. The Beard brothers are fictional, but they represent the thousands of men, and some women too, who left their homes to search for fortune in the California gold rush. You're going to learn a lot about that in 4th grade, the gold rush. Many people started their journeys in one of the towns known as the jumping off points. While Sam's family set off from Independence, Missouri, others chose to leave from St. Joseph, Missouri, or Council Bluffs, Iowa. Wherever the trip started, the preparations looked much the same. Most families used a guidebook like the one the Abbotts carry. Theirs was written by Joel Palmer, who traveled west in 1845 and 1846. These guidebooks suggested routes and strategies. They also gave lists of needed supplies and directions for setting up a wagon. Palmer and the other real-life immigrants wrote about lots of animals in their journals. They described prairie dog towns and buffalo stampedes. They wrote about gathering buffalo dung for fuel. circling wagons at night and listening to the wolves howl. The snowball fight Sam's family has in this book is based on one that Margaret Frink described in her 1850 trail diary as she camped near the Plate River in June. So this is an actual diary entry. See how it's different writing? Kind of like what we're reading in our language arts book. At dark, while I was cooking supper, a heavy storm of wind and snow came up. There was no shelter, and we ate our supper while it was snowing and blowing. During the night, the men took turns guarding the horses in the snow, Mr. Frink being with them part of the time. Tuesday, June 18th. That was a bright June morning. We snowballed each other till 10 o'clock when the sun got too warm for the snow to remain. They had fun having a snowball fight. Diseases were a constant worry on the trail. The cholera that leaves Sarah an orphan and the mountain fever that nearly kills Sam are just two examples. Today, historians and scientists understand the causes of those illnesses, which are no longer that great of a threat like they were in the 1850s. Today, experts know that unsanitary conditions and contaminated drinking water contributed to the cholera epidemic. That's why all our water gets filtered and cleaned. They believe tick bites were mostly caused the mountain fever. The ticks are those little bugs you get in your skin. They like to drink your blood. And we now call that the Rocky Mountain spotted fever. While some pioneer families worried about encounters with Native Americans along the trail, most who traveled around 1850 had experiences similar to the Abbotts. More than 20 different tribes lived and passed through the areas around the Oregon Trail. The Sioux and the Shoshone who helped Sam's family are frequently mentioned in real historical diaries from this time period. They traded with travelers, served as guides, and assisted with river crossings. In the latter days of immigration, there was more tension. Violence between the groups became more common, especially after the U.S. government began sending more soldiers west, and some military commanders broke treaties that had been made with the tribes. In researching Ranger and Sam's adventure, I became immersed in diaries, journals, trail guides, maps, and artifacts. The National Frontier Trails Museum and Merrill J. Mates Research Library in Independence, Missouri, served as amazing time machines, plunging me back to the days of the Oregon Trail. One of the people I met in those faded journals was Lizzie Charlton, a real-life teenager who traveled west with her family in 1866. Sam's ever-complaining older sister was inspired by the real-life Lizzie in her journals. Here is another couple journal entries. April 19th, the last night it rained and made the road so muddy that we did not start until noon. We traveled 14 miles today, and it rained all day. It's so cold. We like to freeze to death. They didn't always have good grammar. April the 20th, this morning it is still cold enough for winter. We traveled until 2 o'clock today. It was so disagreeable and cold. We had to stop the rest of the day. May the 14th, camped for tonight on the bank of the Plate River. It looks very much like we might have a storm tonight. Came 18 miles today through sand and mud holes till there is no name for it, and I'm very tired of walking. Can you imagine that? Walking, walking, walking every single day. All right, there's just a little more to go. I owe many thanks to those who helped me on my time traveling journal. Ranger was inspired by the stories of many real-life search and rescue dogs. When I was doing research for Ranger and Time series, I spent time with Oakland and Easton, who are part of the Chaplain Canine Rescue. So she spent time with dogs. Here's one of the dogs, so she could get to know what these rescue dogs were like, so she would understand Ranger and his training. Here it is. And they really do have dogs who do that, so. Like Ranger, these dogs are excited to do their work. They look forward to a reward after a job well done. Their handlers lavish them with lots of petting and praise. Good dog, good job, followed by a drink of water. Then, like Ranger, they finally get to go home when they've done their work. So that was the story of Ranger and Time in the author's note. I hope you enjoy it. Come back for our next book. You'll be surprised what it is because I don't even know yet. I have a few ideas, so bye-bye.